Take a seat by the fire or get cozy in your sleeping bag. Tonight we've got some stories to tell by the campfire. Before we begin, if you think you might fall asleep, please introduce yourself in the comments, and while you're there, please like and subscribe. I'm always interested in knowing what country everyone is from, so let us know in the comments and share what time it is where you are. Thank you once more for joining me. Get cozy, dim the lights, grab a glass of water, and make sure your tent is zipped shut. Don't forget to say hello in the comments. It's time to close your eyes. I remember that summer vividly. I was about 15, and my family decided to spend a few weeks camping near the lake. It was the perfect escape from the sweltering heat of the city. We set up our campsite, complete with a cozy tent and a small bonfire pit. Days were filled with swimming, hiking, and enjoying the company of my parents and younger brother. One evening, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the tranquil waters. The crackling of the campfire filled the air, and we all huddled close, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows. My little brother was captivated by the stars that dotted the night sky, and my parents laughed and reminisced about their own childhood camping trips. As the fire dwindled and everyone retreated to their tents, I lay in my sleeping bag, feeling the cool breeze against my skin. I could hear the distant hum of insects and the soft lapping of water against the shore. It was peaceful, serene, until a rustling noise interrupted the quiet. I lay still, my heart quickening as I strained my ears to listen. The rustling grew louder, closer. A chill ran down my spine as I realized that the sound was coming from just outside my tent. It was too rhythmic to be the wind, it sounded deliberate. Fear clenched my chest, and I held my breath, hoping that whatever was out there would just move along. But then, I heard it, a low, guttural growl. My pulse raced, and I felt a surge of adrenaline. I knew I needed to see what was causing the noise, even though every fiber of my being was screaming for me to stay hidden. With shaky hands, I unzipped the tent just enough to peer out. Moonlight filtered through the trees, casting eerie shadows that danced on the ground. And there, just a few feet away, I saw it. It was a large, hulking figure, partially obscured by the darkness. My breath caught in my throat as my eyes locked onto it, two glowing orbs that seemed to pierce through the night. The growl grew louder, more menacing, and the figure took a step closer. Fear paralyzed me, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. My instincts told me to stay hidden, to stay quiet, but curiosity and dread pushed me to inch the tent flap open just a bit more. That's when I saw its shape, a massive, shadowy creature with elongated limbs and sharp glistening teeth. Its eyes never left mine as it stood there, almost as if it were studying me, assessing my fear. As the seconds dragged on, I felt a sense of dread. I couldn't tear my gaze away from those eyes, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a predator, a force much more powerful than me. My heart pounded in my chest, drowning out the sounds of the night, as I realized that whatever this creature was, it was not something to be trifled with. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature turned and melted into the shadows, disappearing into the night. The woods fell silent. I zipped the tent shut, my mind racing with questions and possibilities. Morning came, and I emerged from my tent, shaken but determined to find some rational explanation for the night's terror. I scoured the area around the campsite, half hoping to find evidence of a prank or a wandering animal, but there was nothing, no signs that the creature had ever been there. I tried to shake off the unease, chalking it up to an overactive imagination and the dark of the night playing tricks on my mind. Reluctantly, I shared my experience with my parents over breakfast, expecting them to dismiss it as the product of my teenage imagination. My dad chuckled, attributing the sounds to a nocturnal animal, probably just a bear rummaging around the campsite. Mom nodded in agreement, mentioning that bears were known to roam these parts from time to time. As much as I wanted to accept their explanation, a gnawing feeling remained deep within me. I knew what I'd seen and heard. It was no bear. It was something bigger, something much scarier. Even now, years later, whenever I'm surrounded by the tranquility of the great outdoors, I can't help but think about that night. I've heard the usual explanations, the logical reasoning, but deep down, I'm certain that what I encountered was something different, something you hear about in urban legends. I always think about going back to that place with some friends and searching for that monster. But that's probably not a good idea, is it? I love to go camping. Been doing it my whole life. Never had a scary experience until this past summer. My boyfriend and I decided to go out to the gorge for some quality time camping. We had always gone with several other people, but this was the first time it was just the two of us. When we got out of the car to prepare our gear for the hike back to the camping spot, two sketchy-looking dudes came out of the trailhead, looked us up and down, and got into their old-school VW camper van. I had a weird feeling but shrugged it off and proceeded back to our camping spot. I had previously camped in the same area a handful of times and knew it pretty well. Once we got back there, I knew of a handful of different camping spots and proceeded to check them all out for the one that would be ideal. I noticed what looked like someone camping further up the hill, so I picked a spot a little further down where we'd be mostly out of sight. Not out of earshot though, as I heard yelling over on the trail. It was starting to get dark by the time we got everything set up, so I figured I'd start looking for firewood. Suddenly this guy appears out of nowhere and asks us if we'd like any help and offered to sell us a bundle of firewood for $10. I laughed because we were in the woods, thus surrounded by wood which I could pick up off the ground, for free. He then said I wouldn't find much wood because they'd already cleared it out over the past few weeks. Few weeks? I asked him how long he'd been camping up there, and he said almost a month. The longest anyone can camp in this area, a national forest, is 2 weeks. I already had the creeps about him, and he claimed he was up there by himself. I asked him why I heard him yelling with someone then, and why he had referred to more people when talking about the wood. He stammered and was like, "Oh well, yeah, there's some dudes I know camping over there up on the other side of the river." Then he proceeds to tell us that he's been lonely since he arrived. He was from Pennsylvania, took a bus to Lexington, Kentucky, and had been living in the woods back behind where I currently work. I knew exactly where he was talking about because I see homeless, immigrants, and drug addicts coming in and out of those woods every day. So basically he was a homeless man who somehow got a ride out to the gorge and decided he would just live there instead. He had been living on snakes, bugs, and selling firewood for food and beer. But he said we were the first people he'd seen in a few weeks. His stories were all over the place, and I knew he was lying about a lot of what he told us. He wasn't alone even though he claimed to be. He even took us to his camp where there was tons of stuff for several guys, not just one. He said he liked camping up top where he could see everything and everyone. By now it was dark and he helped us get a fire going. I was trying to politely get him on his way back up the hill so I could have a minute to process all of this. When he left, I started whispering to my boyfriend that there was no way in hell I could sleep with that lying sketchy homeless creep right up the hill. We didn't have a gun, knife, or even a dog to protect ourselves if we needed to. I said let's quietly get our shit together and get the hell out of here. Which we did, only we left our new tarps set up because they would make too much noise and he'd know we were leaving. As soon as I stood up with my pack, ready to get the hell out of Dodge, he yells, "How's it going?" and we proceeded to GTFO as quickly and quietly as possible. In my mind, we were either getting robbed, kidnapped, killed, or something else, because he was not alone. His stories didn't add up, and his background of where he came from made me believe he was running from something and was trying to hide by living off the grid. I called the Rangers the next morning and told them about him. Luckily, all he got from us was a set of new tarps. Weeks later, we saw on the news that multiple people had gone missing in the area and that there was a manhunt for the guy who wouldn't leave us alone. I always think about how we really dodged a bullet when I insisted that we left. We found a new camping spot the next year. I was about 11, my sister was 13. We slept in the living room of a little caravan we used to stay in over summer. There wasn't a lot to do. The campsite didn't have any amenities. I passed the time playing with my sister, taking walks or playing the Nintendo. This was '98, so Castlevania and Donkey Kong Country weren't nostalgic yet, they were just lame. I couldn't wait to get home and back to the PC so I could get my theme hospital on. But mostly I'd read. I had a collection of books about ghosts, UFOs, cryptids, and such. I'd pick them up at library sales or in charity shops. My favorites were the unexplained true stories, like the Dover Demon or the Gulf Breeze incident. There was a quarry on the other side of the site. Sometimes at night I'd pretend the two red lights were the eyes of the Mothman who'd swoop down to terrorize my family. What I'm getting at here is I was a kid, and I had an active imagination, but I never believed anything spooky would actually happen to me. If something out of the ordinary happens, it's just your mind playing tricks on you, right? I woke up one morning around 6:20. It was gray outside, the sun had just come up, but fog and cloudy skies ensured it wasn't too bright. I felt uneasy, because I'd usually sleep till 9 at least. It was silent. My sister wasn't even snoring as she normally did. And then I heard it. It sounded like a horse galloping. It was just outside the window. It was unsettling, to say the least. Had a horse escaped from a nearby field? Surely not. I'd never seen any horses around here, and what's more, it didn't sound heavy enough. Whatever it was making circles around the caravan. I'd hear it fade a little as it looped around the other end where my parents slept, and then get louder, almost next to my head. It had the irregular rhythm of a gallop, but I never heard 4 legs. It was almost like a person was skipping very, very quickly, but no person could be heavy enough to make the kind of noise on soft ground. It was fading, off into the distance. Whatever it was seemed to have ran off. I breathed a little easier. What a crazy situation. Maybe I hadn't fully woken up yet and was having a dream hangover. And then it came back. It was getting louder and more insistent. I decided to take my chances. "Rosie? Are you awake?" "Yeah," she said, voice quivering. "You can hear that, right?" "Yeah." "What is it?" "I don't know," I answered truthfully. "I'm afraid to look outside though." "Why?" "I'm afraid it might be the devil." She moaned in fear. There was a thump from the other end of the caravan, like whatever was outside had grazed it. I pulled my blanket tighter around me. After about a minute, it faded again. I told myself if it came back, I'd look outside, and the devil be damned. It didn't come back. My parents woke up around 8, made us breakfast, and the fog cleared. We asked them if they'd heard anything strange earlier. They hadn't. There were no scrapes on the caravan that would suggest something heavy bumping against it. Apart from my sister, there was no evidence that anything had ever happened. Except for one rough footprint outside the front door in the shape of a hoof. To this day, I regret not looking outside to see what it was. But when I wake up in the middle of the night and everything seems so strange, I understand why I didn't. About a year ago, I embarked on a long road trip to New Mexico with a friend. We mostly camped along the way, and our first night of camping happened in the Jefferson National Forest at a campsite in West Virginia. We found some pamphlets for campsites at a gas station and decided to head to a place called White Rocks Campground. It was quite a journey, a 25-plus mile drive up a dirt road into the mountains. We were truly in the middle of nowhere. As we made our way in, we didn't spot any other cars except for one truck that followed us for about 15 minutes before turning down a different road. Along the route, we passed a massive coal factory with a sign that read, 62 days since an on-site incident. The only people we encountered on our drive were a group standing on the side of the dirt road, huddled around a plastic bin that was on fire. It was all quite unusual, but our excitement about camping and the road trip had us laughing off the weirdness rather than worrying, despite having no cell phone reception and being deep in the mountains. Upon arriving at the campground, we found it completely deserted. Not a single car or person in sight, and this campground had about 30 sites. We drove around, hoping to spot someone, but when it became clear we were alone, we randomly picked a site and decided to stay. We got out of the car and stood there, listening. The silence was unnerving. I've always loved being in the woods and have never felt scared or intimidated, but this time was different. There were no bird sounds, just thick, eerie silence. It was like something out of a Blair Witch movie. The daylight was fading fast, and we decided to start a fire and set up our tent to get comfortable. My friend was in charge of setting up the tent while I worked on the fire. As we went about our tasks, we'd occasionally stop and listen. My friend even commented that if anyone were to approach us, at least the crunchy leaves everywhere would make them easy to hear. You can probably see where this is going. I thought we were just getting spooked by our imaginations, but it genuinely felt like someone was watching us. It was the first time in my life I'd ever experienced that feeling. I had goosebumps, and I wanted to leave, but I kept my composure for my friend, who, as it turned out, was also internally freaking out but trying to keep it together. Once we got the fire going, the tent was set up, and our sleeping bags were ready. The sun had completely set. Sitting around the fire together, the darkness seemed to encroach upon us, making us feel suffocated. My friend tried to alleviate the tension by pulling out a book to read aloud and make us feel more at ease. While she was reading, I used my headlamp to occasionally scan the area around us. Since we arrived at the campsite, I had this nagging feeling that someone was out there in the woods. It was pitch black, and our fire acted like a beacon. My friend and I decided, screw it, let's go to bed. We thought we'd go to sleep quickly and pack up in the morning to get the heck out of there. We extinguished the fire, and I decided to grab the one knife we had, which was still in the car, keeping it beside me in the tent. After settling into our sleeping bags, my friend pulled out her cell phone to see if she had any cell reception. But, as expected, there was no signal. She tried dialing her boyfriend just in case, and I remember saying out loud, "We have no reception out here, it won't work." We lay in silence, watching her phone trying to dial out, but it eventually disconnected. Just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, suddenly, about 20 feet off to the left of our tent, we heard footsteps. These weren't quiet, gradual steps. They sounded like someone had been standing behind the tree near our tent and started walking toward us. Those crunchy leaves certainly did their job. We froze, staring at each other with wide eyes. The footsteps continued, coming closer to the tent, then veering behind it for a couple of yards before stopping. The silence that followed was chilling. These were heavy, booted footsteps, with the distinct rhythm of a person walking, not an animal. My friend grabbed the knife that was next to my bag, and with her headlamp on, unzipped the tent and stepped out. She stood in front of the tent with her knife drawn, scanning the area with her light. She was nothing short of a warrior. We both listened for more footsteps or voices during what felt like an eternity of silence. I could see the light from my friend's headlamp darting around the trees, but there was nothing there. She leaned back into the tent and whispered, "We're getting the hell out of here." We packed up everything within maybe 10 minutes, moving quickly, and then we bolted from the campsite. Looking back on it, it's amazing how we didn't lose our heads. We stayed calm while packing, even though we were internally screaming with terror. We only had our headlamps on, and the whole time we were packing up, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hill people were watching us and waiting to grab us and pull us into the darkness. We felt entirely helpless. But it didn't seem real, like we were just psyching ourselves out. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched as we sped away. Then came the confirmation that someone or something had been tracking us. As we pulled out of the campsite, we spotted two dirty black trucks pulled off to the side of the road, concealed in the trees but still visible. They had definitely not been there when we arrived earlier. The nearest residential homes were about 15 miles away. We didn't see anyone around the trucks, but we didn't stop to look. We reached a motel and stayed there for the night. We shared our story with the motel owner, who was incredibly kind and comforting. He even gave us some cash for another motel if we needed it. I made a promise to that man that I would give him a stellar review. I'll remember every detail of that night for the rest of my life. The unsettling feeling of being watched, the sudden footsteps so close to our tent, and the ominous black trucks by the road. In the 90s, before everyone had cell phones, my Girl Scout troop was camping in a state park when a terrible storm came through the area with major flood warnings. The rangers at the park frantically came through every campsite and evacuated everyone to higher ground. Everyone, that is, except my group and the Boy Scouts in the site next to us. We went to bed with light rain, but woke in the middle of the night to our tents collapsing from the water quickly rising. The Boy Scouts, they were 12 to 16 years old, we were between 7 and 9, helped us quickly pack our site into our cars. Unfortunately, the roads were too dangerous to drive because we couldn't see how deep the water was. And we didn't know if any sections of the road had washed out. We abandoned all the vehicles and used the map that the scout leaders had to find someplace that wouldn't be flooded. A few miles away there were treehouse cabins that were built around a tree and lofted 15 feet in the air. It was decided that we needed to move quickly, and that was our best shot. The older boys and the adults carried the smallest girls when it became clear that the wind was preventing them from staying on their feet. The wind and rain soaked everyone through to the skin. We made it to the cabins, and the adults broke in and raided the emergency supplies there for space blankets. There was no way to build a fire because there was no firewood. It had been especially dry this year, and starting campfires was forbidden due to risk of starting a forest fire. I remember shivering for hours, all of us girls in the middle of a huddle on the floor with the boys on the outside trying their best to keep us warm. One of the boys asked us if we knew any Girl Scout songs. We sang every song we knew, and the leaders taught us a few more that they had learned. At some point we convinced the boys to sing in rounds with us. The storm lasted through the night. Some girls started crying, and I remember one had a panic attack. The sound of the storm battering away at the cabin would send creaks all along throughout the space. The fact that we were essentially in a treehouse made the whole thing even more scary. I was convinced that we were going to be blown over and either fly away or all be crushed when we hit the ground. It was impossible to even see what was happening outside. You could just hear the sound of the water, the rustling of the trees, and the creaking of the cabin. If we didn't die from the cold, we'd definitely die in the rushing water. The storm continued battering the cabin long throughout the night. Eventually, once we were a bit more dry, a bunch of us managed to fall asleep. I'd been lying there for what felt like hours, struggling to doze off due to the loud banging. I'd constantly jump up when I was half asleep and couldn't quite get there. In the early hours of the morning, I was lying down staring at the ceiling when I started to finally not be able to keep my eyes open anymore. I closed them and felt myself slipping away. A branch flew through one of the windows in the cabin, throwing glass everywhere and waking up everyone. The room was full of screams, and the camp leaders were frantically trying to calm us down whilst figuring out what had happened. The place was still really dark, and a few kids had been cut with the glass. The older boys and the camp leaders helped patch everyone up and dealt with the glass situation. If there was any night to earn some medals, it was definitely this one. We all really came together, and I felt safe with those people, even though the situation was so dangerous. Morning came, the rain slowed down to a light drizzle, and a ranger showed up assessing damage to the park. He discovered us, and immediately drove to get help. They returned with a bunch of trucks and all-terrain vehicles and drove us to a location where doctors were on site to evaluate us. It was sheer luck that none of us had anything worse than the chills and a few cuts from the glass. It could have gone worse than it did, and we were unbelievably lucky to have survived at all. We could have easily died in our sleep if the flood had come through all at once instead of slowly rising. If the Boy Scouts hadn't been there, then us small girls could not have made the hike to safety. If we had tried to drive, we would have been washed away. My wife, my dog, and myself were on our second day of an 80 kilometers hike in northern Ontario, Killarney Provincial Park. We set up camp on a point about 750 meters into a lake. One way onto the point and one way off the point. We were hearing wolves since about 9 p.m. We went to bed by about 10 and the howls were getting closer and closer. Then, one owl from right behind us on the trail down to the point. I got out of the tent and started making lots of noise trying to scare it off. This usually works for bears whom we have had lots of encounters with. I didn't see anything there and didn't hear anything either. I went back to bed and laid down, trying to act confident as to not upset my wife. Then when we both heard something outside of the tent, my dog was crazy quiet but shaking. I opened the tent to find a wolf staring at me from about 15 feet away. I grabbed the bear spray and took aim. I didn't use it, but I again started screaming at the wolf and took a few charges towards it. Again, this usually works when faced with a black bear if you have no escape. The wolf didn't really care that I was there yelling at it. It kind of hung out for a few seconds, then kind of very casually walked into the tree line just far enough that I couldn't see it anymore. I built a fire between the tent and the bush, sat up all night, and kept my headlamp on all night. Had to listen to 3 or 4 wolves howl to each other the whole time, about every 20 minutes. They were very close. One, I would estimate to be within 50 yards. I was sure they were going to come and grab my dog. At about 6 a.m., a bunch of them started howling all together, way more than during the night, but it sounded like 8 to 10 wolves. We waited until about 8 a.m., then packed up and got the hell out of there. We were 36 kilometers deep. Took us 2 days to hike in, but we hiked out in 6.5 hours. About 1.5 hours into our hike out, the wolves started howling behind us again. They were following us out. On the way back, we saw a bear with 2 cubs. This would usually concern us a bit, but we were just like, get the hell out of my way. My wife lost all her toenails from the hike. And my poor dog got some serious anxiety about being in the tent. I'm a wilderness survival instructor and security contractor. A couple of days ago, a good friend of mine, who is also one of my students, informed me that his dad just acquired 150 acres of land in a secluded and mountainous part of my state. This is someone with whom I've explored the woods before. He's more than competent when it comes to wilderness survival. The property, largely unexplored except for 100 yards that his dad had used for his horses, who are currently roaming freely, seemed intriguing. According to my friend, his dad got an incredible deal on the land. Given my friend, now a father of 3, doesn't get out into the woods often, I agreed to join him for what seemed like a fun outing and much-needed break. We share interests in our indigenous roots, cars, wilderness survival, and various other activities, ensuring lively conversations while in the woods. However, his dad cautioned us against exploring the woods without a gun, citing the presence of coyotes. But being natives of this area, we know coyotes rarely pose a threat to people. Additionally, my friend, whom we'll call DJ, previously mentioned seeing human-sized movement in the tree lines during his earlier visits to the property. Yet, due to his poor eyesight, he couldn't confirm what he had seen. For our exploration, I brought along my AR and a small flint napping kit, mainly for amusement. And off we went onto the property. Initially, we hiked across fields and creeks, multiple natural springs, and ponds, everything appearing normal and showcasing a beautiful landscape. But as we ventured into the unexplored forested section, the atmosphere changed dramatically. The forest exuded an eerie ambience reminiscent of the woods in the movie The Ritual. Gray and ominously quiet, except for the occasional creaking of the tall cedar trees. It felt like we were being observed from every angle. The air carried a putrid stench, akin to rotting flesh. Intrigued, we followed the smell and stumbled upon the remains of 3 to 4 cows. I took a video of them to show them to anyone who might know what could have done this. Examining the exposed skulls revealed no evidence of bullet wounds. Something had killed them, scattering their bones over a 30-yard area. Large and vague footprints surrounded the remains. Pressing deeper into the woods, accompanied only by silence, the smell of death, and the sound of our own heartbeats, we noticed various tracks along the stream. There were large coyote prints and something else, also large, intentionally avoiding the sand. Continuing, we encountered trees bent over and pinned behind others while still alive. An occurrence impossible in nature. Further along, we discovered what resembled a primitive tool made of bone, possibly a scooping tool or knife. It disturbed us because although rudimentary, it appeared more primitive than anything a human would make, yet clearly shaped intentionally. Our hike led us to a clearing with a pond encircled by large circular tracks. On the opposite side of the pond stood a peculiar little tree structure, an A-frame with rocks propped against it. However, it lacked stability, and the arrangement of rocks seemed oddly deliberate. Notably, there were no signs of campfires or camping debris nearby. This wasn't a location easily accessible from a house. I extensively photographed and filmed this strange hut-like structure. As dusk approached, we decided it was time to head back. I had a flashlight attached to my AR, but relying on that in the dark, when there's something out there capable of killing cows and making tools out of their bones, didn't seem wise. We retraced our steps out of the forest, reaching our trucks just before it became too dark. While leaving, we noticed an unidentified figure atop one of the hills, but chose not to investigate further. It's worth mentioning that the previous owner commenced construction on the property, abruptly stopped, and vacated the premises. We're planning on going back there again this weekend, but this time with a few more people and all of our camping gear. I grew up in these woods and usually feel comfortable there. However, I stumbled into a few unsettling situations that would stick in my mind forever. This was one such occasion. I was 18 at the time. One evening, my 2 friends, Mike and Paul, and I decided to go camping. Well, camping might not be the right word since we didn't plan to spend the night, just chill and have some fun around the campfire for a while. The plan was simple: head out, build a campfire, drink a few bottles of wine, eat something, and head back home for a good night's sleep. We met at my house while it was still sunny outside, got ready, and headed out. Our destination was an old abandoned quarry in the middle of the woods, about 40 minutes from my house. Even though the quarry had a tragic and frankly creepy history, it was a popular place for such occasions. When we got there, the sky was already reddish as the sun slowly sank behind the hills. We quickly gathered all the firewood we could find so we wouldn't have to look for it later. As darkness fell and everything around us turned into impenetrable blackness, we managed to get the fire going. We were in a great mood and were getting ready for our first toast. That's when we realized we made a horrible mistake. We forgot the corkscrew. We attempted to open the wine without it, but quickly gave up. The bottles were quite expensive, and we didn't want to damage them. At this point, it was clear that one of us would have to jog back to retrieve the corkscrew. After some discussion, I volunteered with 2 conditions. Firstly, they would give me a hatchet in case something went wrong along the way. Secondly, no pranks when I got back. Mike and Paul agreed without hesitation. They handed me a hatchet and a flashlight and sent me on my way. As I jogged through the forest, I heard a noise resembling a boar. Suddenly, I remembered a warning I received from an older hunter a few days ago. He said that at this time of year, boars were getting dangerous, especially at night. I was a bit nervous, but luckily managed to survive unharmed. I arrived safely back home, much to the surprise of my mom, who didn't expect me so early. I explained the situation. She just laughed. I grabbed the corkscrew and headed back. Not wanting to encounter a boar, I chose another slightly longer path, this time through an open field. After a while, I reached our spot. It was a small clearing surrounded on one side by massive rocks, maybe 70 meters tall, and on the other side by a thick forest. Our campfire was in the middle of the clearing. When I approached it, I realized that there wasn't anybody around, although our backpacks were still on the ground and the fire was burning brightly. Great. We specifically agreed that there would be no pranks when I got back. Those guys think they're funny, I thought to myself. I resignedly sat down near the fire facing the woods. That's the only place where they could have hidden, I thought. I was really tired, and all I could think about was the taste of the exquisite Pinot that we brought with us. I wasn't in the mood for their games, and I was getting quite mad. That's when I heard the snapping of twigs and rustling of leaves from the edge of the forest, maybe 30 meters from where I was sitting. The sound was rhythmic and undoubtedly the sound of somebody walking. I aimed my flashlight in that direction and spotted a tall person wearing a dark hoodie. As I shined my flashlight on him, he stopped walking, turned towards me, and just kept staring motionlessly. Even though he was facing me directly, I couldn't see his face. I shouted, "Paul, you fat jerk. I know you're trying to scare me. We agreed on something, so stop messing around and come out." As I finished, the hooded figure turned and walked deeper into the woods. At that moment, my phone started ringing. I hurriedly took it out of my pocket. It was Mike. I took the call and started barking at him, "Really funny, you guys. I thought we agreed on something. What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about you trying to mess with me. I clearly saw you, so you can come out." Mike seemed frozen for a minute. For what felt like an eternity, all I could hear was his heavy breathing and Paul mumbling something in the background. When he finally snapped back to reality, he said, "Dude, we're at your house. We heard some footsteps. At first, we thought it was you messing with us. But then we got scared and decided to look for you. I forgot my phone at your house, so we couldn't even call you. Just get out of there, and we'll come back for our stuff together." Nonsense. That's just another of your stupid pranks, and I'm not buying it. Hold on a second. There was some incoherent mumbling for a while. "Hey, what's going on?" My mom's voice suddenly came from the phone. My head spun, and my heart skipped a beat as I realized they weren't kidding. Suddenly, a wave of fear ran through my body. However, I managed to convince my mom that everything was fine and that she shouldn't worry. She gave the phone back to Mike. "Just leave everything and come back. We're heading over right now. We'll meet you halfway there. I'm not going anywhere alone again. You better get here quick. I'm waiting for you." I hung up. I didn't want to make any more noise than I already did. I quickly turned off my flashlight and backed off from the light of the fire. I moved all the way to the huge wall of rocks, figuring that if I had my back covered, it would eliminate one possible approach for the unwanted visitor. I stood there in complete darkness, trying not to make a sound while tightly clutching my hatchet, which would be my best friend for the next half an hour. I had to convince myself not to curl into a ball in fear. Even my own body started to betray me as my hearing worsened due to my wildly beating heart. I tried to calm myself, but in the worst-case scenario, every bit of adrenaline would help. After what seemed like an eternity, I spotted 2 weak light beams coming from the forest. I heard Paul shout my name. I'd never been so relieved. I finally ran out of my hiding spot to greet my friends. For quite some time, we just stood there, laughing from relief. We even got a bit cocky and considered staying. After all, there was just one, supposedly, creep lurking between the trees, and there were 3 of us. Funny. Minutes earlier, I was terrified, and suddenly I was full of tough bravado, thinking, what could possibly happen? In the end, good judgment prevailed, and we decided to leave. We packed our things, extinguished the fire, and left. We took our wine bottles to enjoy somewhere else. Somewhere well-lit and safe. I work for a well-known university as a field biologist and have recently been contracted out to the National Forest Service. My first assignment has been in the Potomac district of the Monongahela National Forest. Basically, I receive GPS coordinates and I either drive or hike to the designated spot and do what they want. This could be setting up trail cameras or counters, monitoring equipment, trail surveys and the like, and then recording the data 24 hours after placement. No big deal. I thought it odd that they specifically requested I place the cameras only 3 feet off the ground and some of the infrared cameras in the trees at specified heights. Some of these locations are on designated trails, but some are way off the trail in places that humans would never go. Sometimes, there isn't a hotel or lodging close enough. These are the remote mountains in West Virginia, and the Forest Service has outfitted me in some pretty dank camping gear on the occasions I might have to camp. I am an experienced hiker and camper and have spent many nights alone out in the field due to my career choice. I am a woman, about 5 feet 6 inches and 130 pounds, but not really afraid of anything. Again, the Forest Service has outfitted me well and I wear an emergency beacon that will send every law enforcement officer in the area to my location in no time. So I have been assigned to this district for a few months now and have really enjoyed my work. West Virginia is very remote and unspoiled, and that's why I enjoy my work. I get to see things most people would never see in their lives, and I have had so many positive and almost spiritual moments up until a few nights ago. I was working up near Spruce Knob, which is the highest point in West Virginia. It's essentially a complex system of trails, wilderness areas, camping, that kind of thing. It has also been snowing with howling winds and ice storms. I was camping up there to complete my work, and while the conditions were rough, I was almost enjoying it. My first night in the woods was pretty peaceful. I made dinner, set up camp and drank some whiskey and smoked some really good bud. I snuggled down in my sleeping bag and slept like a rock. It was very cold, but I wear this turtle fur face mask thing and didn't feel the cold too much. I woke up at dawn and went about building my fire back up, and I was starting some coffee when I noticed all this churned up snow around my campsite. Not tracks, just churned up snow like someone or something had kicked it all around. Weird, but whatever. I had a 15-mile hike to set some cameras and didn't have time to really wonder about it. I set off on my hike, did what I had to do, and started back to camp. I never wear headphones or anything like that, because hearing is one of the most important senses in the wilderness. I want to be able to hear any animals, people, etc. before I see them. It was already past dark when I made it back to camp, and I was too tired to do anything except strip down to my base layer, get in my sleeping bag, and pass out. Around 2 a.m., I woke up because I could hear people talking. People. I was about 30 miles up a gravel road that was locked with Forest Service gates and about 10 miles from where my truck was parked, and I could hear voices. I completely lost it. I have a firearm and I quietly retrieved it from my pack and got back in my sleeping bag and cocked it and waited. I was on high alert, all my senses going wild. Eventually the voices faded and I couldn't hear them anymore, but I never went back to sleep. At daylight, I emerged from my tent to more churned up snow and my 2 trail cameras hanging from a tree about 5 feet from my tent. These were cameras that I had placed 15 miles out from my campsite. I packed my stuff as fast as I could and practically ran back to my truck. Along the way, I saw a lot of footprints all around my site, and when I reached my truck, I discovered it had been broken into and my computer and other equipment had been stolen. I am currently in a luxury log cabin at some resort, too scared to retrieve my other equipment and too embarrassed to tell my superiors how scared I am. The Forest Service brought me a new truck while my other one is getting the window replaced, and I did make a report about the theft, but there is absolutely no way that I'm ever going back to that site. I don't know if this means I will be fired or sent to work a desk, but out of all the years I have been doing this in national forests around the country, this is the most terrified I have ever been. I am not scared of the animals, and I have many stories to share about my encounters with them. I am scared of the people. I've held this story in for the last 6 years because it sounds crazy, and I got told not to talk about it. I went camping 6 years ago with a now ex-boyfriend. The campsite we picked was beautiful. We were able to drive in through some rough trails. The spot we picked was next to some hiking trails that weren't very far from some natural hot springs and a huge waterfall. We were in the middle of nowhere, absolutely no one was around. We set up camp next to the car, went hiking, soaked in the hot springs, came back, and had dinner. It was all very normal. Until we woke up the next day. I need to give some context as to how we slept that night so you can understand my confusion. Before we went to sleep, I put our food cooler in a stereo that we brought in the car and locked it. I put the keys in the front pocket of my backpack and placed the backpack next to my sleeping bag on the far side of the tent, away from the door of the tent. My boyfriend at the time slept nearest the door of the tent with a gun next to him. When we woke up the next morning, I felt fine. I had slept hard, and from inside the tent, everything seemed normal. When we got out, our campsite was absolute chaos. The fire pit we had made was ruined. The cooler had been thrown, and food was scattered all over the place. The stereo was smashed to pieces, lying next to a tree. All of the car doors were open, including the trunk. We stood there for a minute in silence, just taking everything in. The woods felt strange, it was quiet and not the beautiful campsite that I saw yesterday. Everything about those woods felt wrong. My ex accused me of not locking the car and said that an animal got into our stuff. I promised that I had locked it and went into the tent to grab the keys from my backpack, but they weren't there. I found them later on the ground right next to the car. We quickly threw everything in the trunk and left. My boyfriend was quiet and wouldn't talk to me about what had just happened. He finally spoke up when we were almost home and told me that he had a dream about something kneeling over him in the tent, holding his gun, and just staring at him. When I tried to ask him more questions, he got quiet again and said he didn't want to talk about it and that I shouldn't talk about it anymore either. I've tried to forget about it, but I just can't. Something really wrong happened to us in the woods that night. This happened about 10 years ago, in August 2013. I was camping in far north Queensland, Australia, in a place called Barren Falls. I'm a 21-year-old girl, and I was camping with my 2 male friends who were backpacking from Estonia, Theo and Charlie. Where we set up camp was not an official campsite. Instead, we walked along the tourist path, climbed over a railing, followed a train track for a few kilometers, and eventually veered off into the dense forest, downhill to the river. It certainly wasn't easy to get to this area, and there wasn't any mobile phone service, but Theo knew about it from friends who had shown it to him previously. The site was beautiful. We were surrounded by a tropical forest and were only a short walk upstream from the waterfall. After setting up camp, we walked to the waterfall where both Theo and Charlie plunged from the cliff into the water below. I decided not to follow. I was, and still am, scared of heights and the possibility of hurting myself. I sat and watched them for a while before eventually deciding to return to camp and read my book. I was totally relaxed, enjoying the serenity, taking in the beauty around me. What had been an exciting, adventurous day was then interrupted by a deep, sinister laughter coming from the forest surrounding our campsite. Instantly alerted, I felt chills run through my body as I scanned the forest trying to detect where the laughter had come from. There was nothing. I tried to forget about it, convincing myself that my mind was playing tricks on me. Theo and Charlie returned and told me that they had forgotten fire lighters for the campfire. They said that they need to travel to the nearest store to buy some and that I should wait at camp. I told them that I didn't feel comfortable staying at camp, but didn't mention the laughter I'd heard before. I didn't want them to think I was stupid, and for context, at the time I had quite a large crush on Charlie. Stupidly, I wanted him to think I was cool. They told me it would be fine, that they would be back before dark. Reluctantly, I agreed and they made their way to the store. It was about 4 p.m. and I continued reading my book. I began to think about it, and I realized that the walk back to the car was about 20 to 30 minutes, so they would be gone for well over an hour. At this time of year, dusk would be at 5:30 p.m. or so, and I would therefore likely be alone in this remote area in the dark. I distracted myself with my book, but as dusk began to settle, I struggled to read the pages, and fear began to set in. After about an hour, I started to hear footsteps in the forest. My first thought was that Theo and Charlie had returned, and I was instantly relieved that I was no longer alone. I listened for their voices, but heard nothing. My heart dropped. It dawned on me that it may be someone else, and I started panicking. Then came the laughter. The same deep, sinister laughter I'd heard before, only this time it seemed much closer. I sprung to my feet and surveyed the forest. That's when I saw him. He was standing on the other side of a stream, which was connected to the river. Standing on a log, what I saw was absolutely bizarre. He was wearing an immaculate tuxedo, with a top hat and all. I remember being puzzled as to how he was able to get to this area in such clean formal clothes, and I at first thought he may be an apparition or that I was hallucinating. I did a double take, and I was not. I then studied the man's face. It is hard to describe, but it looked like his face was burnt, like Dwight from The Walking Dead, and he had deep scarring covering his face. His hair was shoulder length, very wiry, and unkempt. He laughed, that same laugh I'd heard from the forest. Miraculously, I heard my friends' voices approaching. The man seemed alarmed, and said that he saw somebody else camping upstream, and that he is going to check on them. He left, and minutes later, Theo and Charlie returned. I immediately told them what happened, and they laughed and thought I was making it up, that it was a lame attempt to scare them. Tears began to gather in my eyes, and Charlie realized that I was serious. Theo didn't seem fazed. He was a very stereotypical backpacker and had the carefree nature travelers tend to have. Charlie, however, assured me that I would be okay and had me sleep between him and Theo for the next 2 nights. I barely slept at all for those nights. I kept listening for the laughter, but fortunately never heard it again. For years after, I searched online for any reports of similar encounters. I never found anything, but I have always contemplated what would have happened if Theo and Charlie hadn't returned at that moment. I shudder at the thought.